My name is Jack McCarthy. I am the director of the Poquessing Trail of History project. I used to be the president of the Friends of Northeast Philadelphia History, the organization that sponsors the Northeast Philadelphia History Network meetings. We meet here the first Wednesday of every month, except next month we'll be going on a field trip, and then we take off for July and August. But from September through June, we meet here at Pennypack Baptist Church. So I'm going to talk tonight about the Poquessing Trail of History project. And this blurb here pretty much sums up the project. The Poquessing Trail of History will highlight the rich, amazingly diverse history of the Byberry section of far northeast Philadelphia by activating 4 historic sites along or near the Poquessing Creek Trail, a public nature trail that follows the course of the creek through state and city parkland in Byberry. That's basically the Cliff Notes version of the project. And of course, Byberry is that section of Philadelphia on the far northeastern edge of the city, that little square at the top there. And then, why isn't this moving? Oh. Okay, and then this is a detail of that highlighted section. In the center is Poquessing, in the center is Benjamin Rush State Park. And the solid white line, very squiggly but solid, that's the Poquessing Creek, forms the border between Philadelphia and Bucks County. The dotted white line is the Poquessing Trail. It's a public nature trail that more or less follows the course of the creek. It goes through state parkland, and then on the right you see the lighter green. That's city land. That's Philadelphia Parks and Rec land, which is their Poquessing Park. So the Poquessing Trail more or less follows the course of the creek, but not exactly, through this state park and city park land. And what we're going to do is activate 4 historic sites that are along or near that trail. And so the trail is like the linking aspect to the whole project. Oops, it's hard to. So the 4 sites are, first, we're going to build an interpretive representation of the Benjamin Rush birthplace house, built around 1690, and stayed, survived in the area until it was demolished in 1969. We're going to build a memorial to the original inhabitants of the area, the Lenape. Sometimes they're called the Lenape, but that's incorrect. They call themselves the Lenape. So we're going to build a memorial to them. We're going to restore and honor the Byberry Township African-American Burial Ground, which was established in 1780 by Byberry Friends Meeting, the Quaker Meeting, as a final resting place for free Blacks and people of color in the Byberry area. And then last, we're going to restore and activate Byberry Hall, built in 1847 by the great abolitionist, the Black abolitionist, Robert Purvis, to host anti-slavery and other social issue meetings of the day. So I'm going to talk about each of these sites and the stories behind them over the course of the project. Now, the project, or the course of tonight, the project, again, is an initiative of the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia. That's the sponsor, and it's supported by grants from the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage and the Philadelphia Funder Collaborative for the Semi-Quincentennial. That latter group it's a group of major funders that got together to pool money to support projects around the 250th anniversary of America next year. So we thank those funders very much for their support, and Preservation Alliance for sponsoring the project. We have a team of 3 that runs the project. I'm the project director. Ashlyn Pentecost Ferrin, sitting over here, is the project coordinator. She handles all the communications and scheduling and practical matters. And then Jennifer Robinson is floating around somewhere. They're over there. She works for Preservation Alliance and is the project supervisor from Preservation Alliance for the project. And then we have this group of stakeholders, project stakeholders. These are people or groups with a real vested interest or stake in the stories that we're telling in the project. So Friends of Northeast Philadelphia History, this organization, well, keep going. Byberry Friends Meeting, the Quaker Meeting, the Society to Preserve Philadelphia African American Assets, the Friends of Poquessing Watershed, the Delaware Tribe of Indians, which is the federally recognized tribe of the Lenape, and then the Bureau of State Parks from the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and then Philadelphia Parks and Recreation. Those last two are because the trail runs through both of their land. And the tagline for the project, the land, the people, the stories, that's really the key. So the project is unified by virtue of the fact that these sites and these stories that we're telling are tied to this one section of Byberry along the Poquessing Creek. And we're going to talk about the people who lived there back from pre-colonial times through the mid-19th century. And we're going to highlight the stories of these people and these sites. So those are the three sort of elements: the land, the people, the stories. And I'm going to highlight the stories of each of these four sites. And first, we're going to start with a little background on Byberry itself. Up in the upper right-hand corner there, it's the farthest point in Philadelphia, farthest northeastern point. It was originally inhabited by the Lenape, who were here for thousands of years before the Europeans got here. And what I'm about to say here applies to the greater Philadelphia area in general, Byberry in particular. Then there was sparse settlement by Swedes, Dutch, and English beginning in the 1630s, and then more intense settlement by English Quakers in the early 1680s. And this is when William Penn received his grant of land from the King of England for what became the colony of Pennsylvania. The name Byberry is from the village of Byberry in England, where many of the local settlers came from. Byberry Friends Meeting, the Quaker Meeting, established in 1683 in the area, became a very important institution in Byberry. Byberry was then incorporated as a township within Philadelphia County in 1792, and then absorbed into the city of Philadelphia when the city and county consolidation happened in 1854. That's when all the local governments, the townships and boroughs, were abolished and absorbed into the city of Philadelphia, and the city and the county became synonymous. So at that point, Byberry ceased to be a separate entity and became a neighborhood of Philadelphia. And it was largely a rural area until the mid-20th century. You know, it was mostly farms and villages. And then in the post-World War II era, there came this explosive development and, you know, the housing and roads and shopping centers and everything. So we're going to start with the Lenape. Again, they lived here for thousands, 15,000 years maybe before European settlement. They're known as the grandfathers among the fellow native nations, the original people. They had mostly peaceful relations with those groups that came early, the Dutch and the Swedes and the English. And then beginning in 1682, when William Penn became the proprietor and established the colony of Pennsylvania, they had very respectful, affectionate relations with William Penn. But disputes inevitably arose over land ownership and land use, and some of them became pretty intense. But while William Penn was alive, he and the Lenape had mutual respect and affection for each other. So the Lenape are the broader Lenape nation is all the green area, the light green, mid green, and dark green area here, extending from southern New York to northern Delaware. And they're all tied together by these familial bonds and similar dialects. The ones around here spoke the Unami dialect, and that's the group at the bottom in the dark green. They populated southern and central New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, and northern Delaware. This area they call Lenapehoking. I might be mispronouncing all these names, but I'm doing my best with that. But that means Lenape homeland. And these lands were kind of, centered by Lenape-Wihatuk, which was their name for what later became called the Delaware River. They established villages and practiced their crafts and traditions and customs. They hunted, fished, and farmed along all the creeks that fed into the Delaware River, including the Poquessing Creek, which is the focus of our project. Now, here's this very famous painting by Benjamin West in the 1770s of Penn's treaty with the Indians. And this, the legend has it that when William Penn arrived in Pennsylvania in the fall of 1682, he met with the Lenape in Shakamaxon, sort of outside of Kensington, near the city, along the river, and they forged a treaty. It's very much part of the lore of both the Lenape and the European settlers. That may or may not have happened. And if it did, it certainly didn't look anything like this. Benjamin West painted this painting like 90 years later while living in England. So nobody would have looked like that. The buildings wouldn't have been there, and the event may or may not have happened. But what definitely did happen, as we have documentary evidence, and I want to thank Fred Moore for steering me towards this document. On June 23rd, 1683, two Lenape Sachems, which are chiefs, Temenin and Pamaquan, I guess, sold to William Penn the land between the Pennypack Creek and the Neshaminy Creek. That includes the Poquessing watershed, the whole area in and around the Poquessing Creek. So this is the formal document by which William Penn acquired that tract of land that includes everything in our project. Here's a transcription of that deed. And what's interesting is kind of in the center there, towards the bottom, well, the two chiefs marked, but it says Indians present, and there's these other, was it five other Lenape representatives were there. So this is a formal document that kind of is the first evidence of the transfer of the land from the Lenape to William Penn. Now, the Lenape story, it's very tragic here. They were mostly forced out of the Byberry area by the early 18th century and pretty much out of Pennsylvania completely in the years that followed. Just the inevitable settlement of the land by the Europeans, that the Lenape were denied access to the water and the food sources and what they needed to sustain themselves. So they were forced out, and they undertook this long, tortured journey over 100 and some years westward. They would settle somewhere and then be forced out of there and have to move on and then settle somewhere else and be forced out of there. And eventually, most of them ended up in Oklahoma, with some in Nebraska and Ontario. The Delaware tribe of Indians based in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, is now one of 3 federally recognized Lenape tribes in the United States. All the ones around here that the cultural groups know, they're not recognized by the government as authentic Lenape tribes or people. So the Delaware tribe of Indians is our stakeholder in the group that's in the project, helping us to shape the stories that we tell and how we tell them about their history. This is their website. They're a very vibrant, active community, both preserving their culture and their history, but also, modern life, all the activities of a modern society. So they're like a very valuable partner in our project. We are going to build, as part of the project, some kind of monument to the Lenape somewhere along or near the Poquessing Trail. We don't know yet what that will be or exactly where it's going to be. We're going to be working with the Delaware Tribe of Indians to help tell that story, and that could be it could be just some signage and display panels. It could be a representation of a dwelling. It could be exhibits of artifacts or something. We're not sure, but somehow, some way, we're going to build a memorial to the people who were here for thousands of years before the Europeans got here. So that's the Lenape part of the story, the one site. Moving on to the Benjamin Rush birthplace house. This is another tragic story in its own way. This is an artist rendering of the circa 1690 home that Benjamin Rush was born in. He was born there on Christmas Eve, 1745. This is what it may have looked like, and it did survive for a long time, so there is some visual evidence of it. So Benjamin Rush was a key founding father, very prominent citizen activist in Philadelphia, signer of the Declaration of Independence, father of American psychiatry. He was a renowned physician, a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, very socially active in various causes like abolition of slavery, free education for all, public health, penal reform. So he's just a very prominent, active figure in not just Philadelphia, but the young nation. Founder of Dickinson College, Medical College of Philadelphia, a number of other important institutions. His great-great-grandfather, John Rush, was an English Quaker who came to Byberry in 1683, part of that first wave of Quakers that came soon after William Penn established Pennsylvania. Penn granted John Rush 250 acres in Byberry in 1684, and sometime thereafter, we don't know exactly when, they built that house. The family built that house where Benjamin was born in 1745. Now, he didn't live there long, but when he was like 4 or 5, the family moved into the city, which was like 12, 14 miles south. He didn't like really grow up here, but he held a great affection for the area. In a letter in 1792, he wrote that Byberry afforded the first retreat to my ancestors who fled from religious tyranny with William Penn to Pennsylvania. It was moreover the place where I drew my first breath. It has been, and I hope will always be dear to me on that account. And then in 1812, he visited his birthplace home. He had made a trip out of the city up to Byberry and knocked on the door when the current owners let him in. He was with his son. He and his son went up to the room in which he was born, where he said he drew his first breath. And he wrote in a letter to his good friend, John Adams, who was then the ex-president of the United States. He wrote a very moving letter about how what an emotional experience it was for him to visit that homeland. And he asked the owner, if you ever want to sell, I want to buy it. But actually, Rush ended up dying the following year, so that never happened. The house stayed in the Rush family until 1765, when a local Quaker, Jonathan Parry, bought it. So you can see in the middle there, it says Parry, that's the Parry family plot. And then if you can make out, it says birthplace of Dr. Benjamin Rush. So, this is an 1849 map, and they were still, promoting the fact that this was the house that Rush was born in. The property ends up staying in the Parry family for almost 200 years. And then a number of sort of events came into play that led to its demise. But here's a view of it from the early 20th century. There are 3 sections to the house. The original section again, built circa 1690, is the one closest in this photo. Then there was another section added, we think in the 1760s, sometime in the 18th century. And then there was another section added in the 19th century. So again, 3 sections, but the first one was the one where he was born. Here's another view of it. The section on the left is the original section where he was born. Now, we're fast forwarding now to the mid 20th century. And as I mentioned, this area of the Northeast underwent extensive development in the post-World War II era, and Byberry included. Corman Corporation, one of the biggest builders in the Northeast in the 20th century, purchases a large tract of land in the former Byberry Township area, and including the Rush House. And in 1965 begins work on this sprawling apartment development it calls Rushwood. The company works with the city and the state on plans to preserve the house and make it a historic site. Ultimately, those plans fall through. But, and it's very tangled tale, which I can only summarize very briefly here. But on the left, this newspaper clipping, the city is confident it will get the money it needs to restore the Rush House. So the city had very ambitious plans to restore the house, and federal and state money was appropriated, and they looked like they were set to go. Then the state steps in. So Byberry, which is Philadelphia State Hospital at Byberry, what everybody calls the Byberry, psychiatric hospital nearby, they come up with a plan. They want to disassemble the house and move it to the grounds of Byberry Hospital on Roosevelt Boulevard. Their rationale is that Benjamin Rush, well, first of all, that the house is going to be surrounded by all this development, and Benjamin Rush is the father of American psychiatry. We're a major psychiatric institution in a prominent place. And also there were plans to build a Benjamin Rush State Park right across the boulevard from the hospital. And so they figured it, we should have the house on our property. So they had plans to disassemble it, move it, reassemble it. When those plans went into motion, the city dropped out and didn't pursue their plans. But the state plans never materialized either. So in the course of this, noted preservation architect John Milner was brought in to develop the restoration plans. We're going to see him again later. In the midst of all this, the house is suddenly demolished without warning in February of 1969. The official story is that licenses and inspection, the city department demolished the wrong house because they were given the wrong address by the Philadelphia Historical Commission. And the story was that the Historical Commission had these plans that didn't include all the recent development in the area. So all their addresses were outmoded and inaccurate. And so when the L&I checked with the Historical Commission, about where this historic house is, they gave them the wrong address. And so they destroyed the wrong house. That was the official story. That was not actually what happened. The real story came out in 2011. The official at L&I who ordered the demolition, his son was doing a paper on the Rush House for high school. He went to Father Judge, and he asked his father, what happened. His father hemmed and hawed, didn't want to tell him. Finally, the father admitted. He said, "I ordered the demolition. The house was vacant and dangerous and a public nuisance, and nothing had been done with it for months and months. I ordered the demolition." And the son published this story in this online magazine, the Frankfurt Gazette, in 2011. The father had died in the meantime. So that's what really happened. And but one way or the other, all these efforts to preserve the house ultimately were futile. Here's some articles. Drive set to rebuild the Rush House. City admits it wrecked wrong house. It went on and on for several years after the demolition. So what happened was the people at the state hospital, Bybury, revived their plans to reconstruct the house on the hospital grounds. They went digging through the rubble, trying to rescue all the remnants they could. Here's a guy coming out of the rubble with a window jamb. They took all the stones and everything, and they took them, what they could, to Bybury Hospital. Whoops. And they put the stones from the house in a pile, and they put all the wooden pieces and other architectural elements in a garage, storage garage on the property. And then they erect this billboard on the corner of Roosevelt Boulevard and Southampton Road. Some of you may remember this. I remember seeing it in the 70s. The Benjamin Rush House will be rebuilt here. It stood on the prominent corner. Well, that never happened. That effort just fizzled out. In the meantime, Rushwood development is completed. And this is a recent photo of it. On the far left there, you can see on the left-hand photo on the far left, you can see the historical marker. And that's this marker here that was put there to mark the birthplace of Benjamin Rush. It's about 3 miles from the place where they want to rebuild it at Bybury Hospital. Then in 1975, Benjamin Rush State Park is established. It's on the east side of the boulevard. The state hospital is on the west side of the boulevard. So originally, the state hospital had the lands both on the west side and the east side of the boulevard. Then Benjamin Rush State Park is created, so the hospital is just on the west side, and Benjamin Rush State Park is on the right side, or the east side. The hospital closes in 1990. All those architectural elements were transferred to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which then transferred them to the Pennsylvania State Museum, which ended up deeming most of them irretrievable and not worth preserving and deaccessioning them all. I talked to the guy at the State Museum who said, well, we have a window jamb, which I think is probably that one you saw in the photo. I need to follow up on that. The stones that were in a big pile, they just stayed where they were because they were on the part of the hospital property that became the state park. And what happened is local people knew the story. They began taking the stones as mementos. So state park staff moved the stones for safekeeping to Fort Washington State Park. I went and visited them there when I first was interested in this project. I can't find those photos, but I have photos of all the stones in a big pile there. Then in 2013, Benjamin Rush State Park underwent a massive renovation and upgrade. So they brought the stones back and incorporated them into the entrance columns to the state park. So if you enter the state park off of Southampton Road there, you'll see these 2 columns. This is one of them. Those are made from the stones from the Benjamin Rush House. Original 1690 stones. Our plans are to use those stones and whatever other architectural remnants we can uncover to build some kind of a representation of the Benjamin Rush House somewhere along the Poquessing Trail. And we're working with John Milner Architects. So John Milner, who founded the firm, was the architect that was working on the preservation of the Rush House back in the 60s. His namesake firm, he's largely retired, but he's still somewhat active in his firm, and is very interested in this project. So we, Preservation Alliance, we engaged John Milner, that architects, that firm, to help develop plans and cost estimates for this. And we can't for practical reasons actually recreate the house as an enclosed structure, but we can use the remnants we have and some added materials and build some kind of representation of it with some walls and opening. So we came up with this pavilion type representation. Again, using some materials from the original house and the dimensions of the house, and then having like a pavilion be part of it. So we have these plans, we have cost estimates, and we are trying to raise the money to do this. And we hope to do it in time for the 250th anniversary of the country about a year from now. So, all right, so that was the Benjamin Rush House. Now on to the third historic site, Byberry Township African American Burial Ground. This is somewhat sad story as well. And to understand this story, you have to understand the history of slavery in Byberry. So there's an article that was written by Isaac Comley from a longtime Quaker family. He wrote this article in the 1820s, and it was published by the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. It's a treasure trove of early history of Byberry. He writes, and his ancestors were part of the original settlers, so his family, goes back generations. He says that slavery came to Byberry in around 1720, and that before 1780, enslaved Africans were generally buried on the properties of their masters. And there were 40 to 50 or so also buried on the lands of William Walmsley, a member of Byberry Meeting, and that his property was around Dunksbury and Byberry roads. Then on January 19, 1780, Thomas Townsend, another member of the meeting, deeds a very small plot of his land near the Poquessing Creek to the meeting for the express purpose, and this is the exact wording, for the use of a burying place for all free Negroes within the limits of Byberry particular meeting. The reflection of the lights is making it hard for me to read this. A little bit later, in later iterations of that deed, the wording is changed to all free Negroes or people of color. So they built this burial ground, or not built, they just set it aside to bury area blacks. And the reason for this, the timing of it, is in early 1780, Pennsylvania passed an act for the gradual abolition of slavery. And it just what its title implies. It was for slavery to gradually be abolished in Pennsylvania. And these local Quakers realized we got to have a place to bury these free, newly emancipated blacks. So they established this burial ground. Here's a detail from a survey book by John Comley, who was a prominent member of Byberry Meeting. This is from the 1812, 1846. This is his description of the Negro burial ground, the boundaries and here is a map. So in the center there, you see Byberry Meeting House. That's Byberry Meeting, still there, still in that location. And you go down that Townsend's Mill Road, and then you'll come to the burial ground, which is very near to Poquessing Creek. In 1867, Joseph Martindale publishes a history of the townships of Byberry and Moreland. And he talks about the burial ground. He says, regarding the burying place for the blacks, the record says the first person buried there was Jim, a Negro belonging to Daniel Walton. Now, we don't know what record he's referring to, but in the preface to this book, he says, my colleagues and I have found all kinds of manuscripts and been presented with all kinds of records, and we're using them to create this history. So presumably, some of those records are what led him to write this. Jim is not mentioned in that earlier history that Isaac Comley wrote in the 1820s. He's first mentioned here in the 1860s. And Jim is the only person buried there whose name we know. Nobody else, there's no record of any of the other names. Now, on the right here is a 1767 county tax record, the Byberry section, and there is Daniel Walton on the bottom. And at the very bottom, this is all his taxable possessions. At the very bottom, it says one Negro. Most likely that one Negro is this Jim, because the burial ground opened 13 years later, and Jim, belonging to Daniel Walton, was the first person buried there. Daniel Walton only had one enslaved person. He's not named, but he's listed there. So it's very likely that person is Jim, the one that's buried there. We don't know where, we don't know who else is buried there, but that's the only record we have of who's buried there. So Byberry Meeting continues to maintain the burial ground into the mid-19th century. Here's minutes meeting records from 1849. The committee to consider the present state of the burial ground for colored persons, and they recommend work on the fence surrounding the burial ground. There's another meeting minute from the same time that talks about a committee formed to manage the burial ground and burials therein, meaning that they were still burying people in the late 1840s. But then the burial ground becomes dormant and inactive. In that Martindale book from 1867, he said the graveyard for colored persons situated in the eastern part of Byberry is still kept for that purpose. Some years since, a portion of this yard was plowed up and most of the little mounds were leveled with the earth around so that the exact spot where many of this race were buried can no longer be seen. So we can see even in the 1860s, they're beginning to almost desecrate this burial ground and not giving it much care and attention. That's the 1860s. And he's saying some years since, so it happened prior to that. This is a view of it today. That little sign there is kind of a recent addition, but it's basically this, yeah, thank you. Basically, you know, a sort of overgrown, nondescript, unmarked patch of land kind of in this very remote section adjacent to the state park, which I'll show you in a minute. Okay, so again, Benjamin Rush State Park is created in 1975. The burial ground is immediately adjacent to, but not exactly in, the park. So that little red square on the mid right there, that's the burial ground right on the edge of the park, but not technically in the park. And here's a view from the actual burial ground, very small plot, less than 1/4 of an acre, and it's looking up this pathway. That pathway used to be what was called Burling Road, which was a road in the park. But now it's just a path. But that path is all in the state park. But you know, the area right in the immediate foreground is the burial ground, and that's not in the park. Now, the trustees of Byberry Meeting own the burial ground. They sell it to the city of Philadelphia in 1980. The city has plans to develop an industrial park complex all around the area near the state park. It's all there today off of McNulty Road and Townsend Road, if you know that area. So the city wants this little piece of ground as part of that larger plan, and the meeting sells the plot to the city in 1980, exactly 200 years after they established it in 1780. On the left there, that building with the white roof is the National Archives has a big branch there off of Townsend and McNulty Road. And the plot that includes the burial ground is the property of this now commercial property. But the burial ground, which you see in the little circle there, it's at the edge of the property, right on the edge of the state park. So the property itself, the burial ground itself, never got disturbed. But it technically is commercial property. And then, so it kind of remains forgotten and abandoned, you know, through the late 20th century and into the early 21st. And then things start to happen in the 2010s. Joe Mankiewicz, a local historical researcher, did a tremendous amount of research and had the property successfully nominated to the Philadelphia Historical Register. So it's on the Historical Register. That's the application on the left. And then in 2024, this new organization, the Society to Preserve Philadelphia African American Assets, a new nonprofit, you know, to preserve and honor important Black historic sites. That society approached Preservation Alliance about doing something about this burial ground. So together they raised some money to do an interpretation plan and some other planning around the burial ground. And they also did a number of activities like cleanups. They did a libation ceremony, which is like an honoring ceremony for the ancestors using water. So the plot is now starting to get some attention. Not a lot of funding, but a little bit and some attention. And then in 2024, when we launched the Poquessing Trail of History project, we naturally incorporated the burial ground as one of the sites that we're going to highlight in the project. And then more recently, the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources has approved absorbing the burial ground into the state park. It's literally just feet away from the state park boundary. It's going to officially become part of the state park, so it'll be public land. It'll no longer be commercial property. So we're hoping we raise money to honor and restore the park as part of the Poquessing Trail of History. We engaged, as part of the project, this company, CH Planning. It's a black-led firm with offices in Philadelphia and Washington, to develop some design concepts and cost estimates for doing that. And they came up with some really great ideas, which you can't really see too well here, but that's the plot itself. It's kind of, I don't know what kind of a shape that's called, some kind of trapezoid or something, I don't know, but they have these ideas for a reflective wall, sitting areas, stone walkways, signage, memorials, and they have this very creative ideas to rehabilitate and honor the park. So we are hoping to raise money. We're in the process of trying to raise money to realize that vision. So you saw that we have designs for a representation of the Benjamin Rush House, and also for this. And there's money in the budget to do something for the Lenape as well. And that brings us to our last of the 4 sites to be highlighted in the project, Byberry Hall, which was built in 1847 by the noted Black abolitionist Robert Purvis, who he and his family lived in Byberry from 1844 to 1873. So Robert Purvis, very fascinating man, is born in Charleston, South Carolina in 1810, moves to Philadelphia with his family 9 years later. His father is a wealthy white Scottish cotton broker, and his mother is mixed race, African and Jewish, from a formerly enslaved family. So he is very light-skinned and could easily pass for white, but chose not to, and chose to identify with his African-American heritage and work for his people. His father died when he was young and left him significant wealth, which he then increased significantly with wise investments. So he's a very wealthy Black man. At age 21, he marries Harriet Fortin, the daughter of James Fortin, the very successful sailmaker in Philadelphia, one of the richest and most respected Black men in Philadelphia. So he becomes Robert Purvis's father-in-law. So again, Purvis is educated and eloquent and wealthy and charismatic. He's a good speaker. And so he becomes a very prominent member of the Philadelphia Black community in the antebellum period. He's a founding member of the American Anti-Slavery Society. He goes on a speaking and fundraising tour of England. He's admitted to the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, the first Black member. This is a group formed to, abolish slavery, but they wouldn't let any Blacks in until 1842. And by the way, Benjamin Rush was a major supporter of the Abolition Society early on. Purvis then becomes president of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society, president of the Vigilance Society. That's the Underground Railroad group. These are the guys that are, shepherding people to safety that are, escaping slavery. He estimates later in life that he helped 9,000 escapees to freedom. I love this quote from John Greenleaf Whittier, the famous Quaker poet, who was at the first meeting of the anti-slavery convention in Philadelphia in 1833. He said, at the close of the president's speech, a young man rose to speak whose appearance at once arrested my attention. I think I have never seen a finer face and figure, and his manner, words, and bearing were in keeping. Who is he? I asked one of the Pennsylvania delegates. Robert Purvis of this city, a colored man, was the answer. So he really was like a captivating figure. Again, he marries Harriet Purvis in 1831. They are involved in the infamous events around Pennsylvania Hall. So Pennsylvania Hall, built at like 6th and Ray Streets in 1838 by the Pennsylvania, and I get the groups all mixed up, the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. And it's built to, host meetings for anti-slavery and abolition and all kinds of other social causes. Well, angry white mobs burn it to the ground within a couple of days of its opening. They were furious at, what was going on in there. One of the things that on record that infuriated the mob was they saw a white man escorting a black woman into the building. Well, it turns out that was Robert Purvis escorting his wife, and they thought he was a white man. But anyway, they burned that to the ground. It was, it's an infamous event in Philadelphia history. And then a few years later, Robert Purvis and his family, they're living near 9th and Lombard Streets, and there are these race riots, and very dangerous, and a lot of black homes and businesses and institutions were burned and people were killed. And Robert Purvis sent his family out to Bucks County for safety and sat on his step with a rifle on his knees at night to protect his home. And he wasn't accosted, but all these experiences forced him to move with his family to rural Byberry, which is like 14 miles out of the city, a safe haven. So he purchases 104 acres in Byberry in 1843. If you can see on the map there, the vertical line right down the middle, that's Byberry Road, or becomes Southampton Road. So Purvis has about 50 acres on the north side, on the south side of that, and 50 acres on the north side. The acres on the north side are adjacent to Byberry Quaker Meeting. And their home is on the other side of the street, Harmony Hall, very stately mansion. Here's a closer view of that. So you see Purvis on the left, Purvis on the right. I live like right where it says Robert Purvis on the right, actually, in Parkwood. So Purvis becomes a pretty prominent figure in Byberry, very wealthy, well-known. Here's the 1853 tax assessment from Byberry. There's about 300 taxable inhabitants. He's about the 15th wealthiest person in Byberry, one of 6 colored listed as colored taxpayer. Only one of only 4 who have a gold lever watch, which apparently was a pretty prestigious item to have. He also is a gentleman farmer. He has all kinds of livestock and produce that they all win awards at local farm shows. I mean, he is subjected to discrimination and racism in Byberry, but he also is a very esteemed member of the community in other circles. So, in the 1850 and 60 census, you see all the land he has under cultivation and the farm machinery and the animals and the crops he has. And he lives right across the street, he and his family, from Byberry Quaker Meeting. And as we saw earlier, Byberry Meeting was established in 1683. It moved to its present location at Byberry and Thornton Roads in 1694. That current meeting house that's there is built in 1808. But Byberry, in addition to being a Quaker religious congregation, is a center of learning and literacy and scientific study and social activism. And Purvis becomes involved in all of it. So members of the meeting established the Byberry Library Company in 1794, the Byberry Philosophical Society in 1829. Purvis is an active member of all these. These are the circulation records for Robert Purvis for the Byberry Library Company in the 1850s and 60s. These are, you can't read them, but these are as a list of all the books he checked out as a member of the library company. And one of the programs that we're going to run for this project is called What Was Purvis Reading? So the Byberry Library, the collection, the books are all still there in the building on Byberry Meeting campus. And we have the book numbers and titles that he checked out in the 1850s and 60s. So we're going to find them and bring them together and do a program called What Was Purvis Reading? And people will be able to maybe hold in their hands or at least look at the actual books that he held in his hands. Not to forget Harriet, that's, you can't really read it, but up on the upper left there, that's her signing in, the sign-in book in 1847 to the library company. And then the Philosophical Society, which did all kinds of lectures and presentations. He was an active member in 1855. In January of 1855, he delivered a lecture on education. And then the following, or 2 months later, he read a poem. See there about midway down. I would love to get the transcript of this talk. In 1856, he gave a lecture on the intellectual condition of the colored race. And he's talking mainly to like white Quakers. But, so most of these meetings, well, the Byberry Library was in a separate building, but these meetings are happening in Byberry Hall, which he and his partners built in 1846, 1847. The deed by which, so Harriet and Robert transferred a small plot of land or sold in 1847 to the trustees of Byberry Hall Association, a new group comprised of 3 men, one of which is Robert Purvis. In the deed, it says, said lot of land to be held by the said trustees for the purpose of having a hall erected thereon to be dedicated to free discussion, to be independent of and untrammeled by any sector party, to subserve the interest or caprice of no bigot, dogmatist, or tyrant, but in the fullest and freest sense to give ample scope and fair field for the utterance of free speech. How sort of pertinent are those words today? So that was the founding document for Byberry Hall. And now in July of 1847, the Pennsylvania Freeman is a abolitionist newspaper, and they published a notice about the very first meeting in the new hall. And they said, the subjects of slavery, capital punishment, and other kindred evils will be discussed. And Robert Purvis is listed there as one of the speakers. And then that same newspaper reports a couple of weeks later on the actual meeting. The new hall in Byberry was opened for the first time July 11th, 1847. The house was quite filled. The exercises conducted on the free meeting principle were very spirited and seemed to give general satisfaction. The various branches of moral reform were touched upon, but anti-slavery claimed special attention. The privilege of plain speaking was freely exercised. And then it goes on to describe how, what a commodious, elegant hall it is. A very spirited meeting happened in 1850. The US Congress passed this Fugitive Slave Act in that year, which is, these onerous requirements on people to capture and return escapees. And so they all met at Byberry Hall on October 18th, 1850. And Robert Purvis then sent a report of the meeting to the Pennsylvania Freeman, which published this full report. And as part of the meeting, everybody in attendance signed this resolution that said, the undersigned citizens of the Township of Byberry, Philadelphia County, met on this evening, the 18th of October, 1850, at Byberry Hall to further consider what course we should pursue in relation to the atrocious fugitive slave bill recently passed by Congress. Resolved that we will utterly disregard the monstrous and inhuman requirements of said bill, viewing them as subversive of the principles of Christianity, the laws of God, and our common humanity. So these people are saying we're going to defy this law, which is, inhuman. So that's the kind of meetings that were happening. I mean, there were also community meetings and other things, but some of these were pretty intense activities. So I can't get into all the details, but Byberry Hall goes through a series of ownership changes in the early 50s. Robert and Harriet repurchase it, which they originally had sold it, and then they sell it to a new group of Byberry Hall trustees in 1854. Purvis himself is not one of the trustees, but he's a stockholder in the organization, an active member. He actually serves as president for a while. He attends meetings there through 1871, but appears to have no involvement after that. And as we will see, he and Harriet were looking elsewhere beyond Byberry at this point. So at this point, you know, the Civil War is over, slavery is abolished. The Purvis's focus changes. They no longer need to be in Byberry for protection. So they sell most of their property. Actually, they lived in Washington for a while because Purvis took a very prominent position with the Freedmen's Bank in Washington, D.C. But in 1873, they sell most of their property in Byberry, move back to the city. Harriet dies in 1875. She's buried in Fair Hill Cemetery. Robert remarries in 1878. And then in 1881, he sells the remaining properties he had in Byberry. And he dies in 1898 at age 87. He's buried with Harriet at Fair Hill Cemetery. But while they were living in Byberry, two of their sons, adult sons, died young, and they're buried in Byberry Cemetery. And these are the stones for William, who died in 1857 at age 24, and Robert Jr. in 1862 at age 27. So they're buried in Byberry. Purvis and his wife did not become Quakers, but they were very involved in the Quaker community and the Quaker activities, and they had their sons buried there. So after, you know, Purvis leaves, and the property goes through various owners. That's it. That's Byberry Road, that sort of, you know, more or less vertical road there. And then in the 1850s, it becomes heavily developed. And then this is an aerial view of what it looks like today. So that diagonal road, that's Byberry Road, and just south of that is the Purvis property, and that little circle there is where their home was, but there's just no trace of it whatsoever. So the trustees of Byberry Hall Association were still in existence all this time. They're mostly made up, the association is primarily members of Byberry meeting. They make the building available for all kinds of community events, from elections and entertainment through the mid-20th century. From 1968 to 2021, it was a martial arts studio. Many of you may remember the martial arts sign and all on Byberry Road. And then in 1980, the Byberry Hall Association is formally dissolved, and the building becomes the property of Byberry Meeting. And meeting members had controlled it all along anyway. In the meantime, did I miss something? Yeah. Some of us here were involved in helping to get a historical marker for Byberry Hall in 2014. On the left there, that's Robert Purvis's descendants who we tracked down. That's a brother and sister, and then the daughter of the brother. They came. It was very moving. So we had a historical marker installed there. And then in more recent years, the meeting has engaged this preservation architect, Kate Cowling, who, by the way, her mentor was John Milner, who's hopefully doing the Benjamin Rush House. They hired her to develop restoration plans for the entire property, and Byberry Hall in particular, and secure grants to restore the building. They got some grants to stabilize the building envelope, you know, the roof and the foundation, and so it's now like structurally sound, and fundraising is now underway to make the building publicly, interior renovations, bathrooms and ramps and all, to make it accessible and serve as a community meeting space and a history center. The Byberry Friends Meeting is one of the stakeholders in our project, and we're working with them and hoping to raise the money to make this possible too. Whoops, So that is the last of the 4 sites that we're going to activate, restore, recreate in this project, right? A memorial to Lenape, a reconstruction of the Benjamin Rush House, restoration of the Black Cemetery, and restoration of Byberry Hall. And they're all linked thematically by being on, along, or near the Poquessing Creek Trail, hence the Poquessing Trail of History. Now, there are really 2 major components to the project. The one is construction and restoration, right? The bricks and mortar. We're raising the money for that, or, trying to, and hopefully we'll get that money and everything will be completed in time for the 2026 250th anniversary. And then the other aspect is the public programming and historical interpretation. And that's what I want to talk about now. So with our grant from the Pew Foundation, we have funding to present 10 public programs over the course of the summer of 2025 through the summer of 2026. Some of these programs are just conceptual ideas at this point. Others are a little further along in development. We are having a big kickoff event June 28th, right? Month and a half or so, at Byberry meeting. It's going to be a neighborhood history event. We hope everybody can come. In September, we're going to do a program with the Delaware Tribe of Indians on Lenape storytelling. In October, we're going to do actually, I can give you more here. In September, we're doing a program with the Delaware Tribe on Lenape storytelling and culture. We're going to have a walking tour and presentation on Poquessing Creek by Adam Levine, who many of you know is a great historian for the Philadelphia Water Department. November, we're going to do a Lights of Freedom, which is a lantern making and workshop and tour where the idea is, recreating escapees, enslaved escapees, moving with their lanterns towards freedom. So we're going to do something along those lines. In December, we're going to do that program I mentioned, What Was Purvis Reading? We're going to find the books that he actually checked out and have them there and have a program about that. So that's the fall, summer and fall of this year. And then the programs next year, some of them are, again, just vague ideas. We're going to do a program on the early Quaker and Lenape interactions. We're going to do a program on revolutionary medicine. In Rush's time, doctors, often use medicinal plants. So we're going to have an expert on Benjamin Rush, and as well as an herbalist, talk about plants and herbal medicine. We're going to do a Lenape foodways and the land program, where they're going to show some of the plantings and seeds that they would use. And then 2 programs yet to be determined on the Byberry Township African American Burial Ground. So we're really kind of announcing these programs tonight. We've been developing them, and now we're ready to sort of, promote them to the world. Again, some of them are very well planned and some of them are just conceptual at this point. But what we want is everybody to stay in touch with the project and stay involved. So this is a screenshot of our Facebook page, and on the right there is a button that says stay in touch. If you click on that button, it'll take you, you can sign up for our mailing list and, hear about all the project activities. Or right now, you can click on the QR code, it'll take you to that page. And so we have a mailing list. We have the website, poquessingtrailofhistory.org. We have a Facebook page. We have an Instagram account. So if you do all these social media things, please follow the project and like our posts and share them. And we're hoping everybody shares and it becomes sort of, this viral movement. So that's it. That's some background on the sites that we're going to be highlighting and the programs that we're going to be offering. So, thank you. You have a microphone. Okay, so we're going to do questions. Can you check the chat? Right?
Is it on? Is it come on?
It's now. Now we got it.
So the way we do this is people that are on Zoom can type your questions in the chat box and we'll read them off. And then people that are here in person can ask the question, but please use the microphone that's provided because people in Zoom land can't hear you when you ask your question. So we'll start with an in-person question. Anybody? Are there chat questions? I'm sorry? No. Poquessing Creek is the bigger creek that forms the border of, and so he was asking if the Byberry Creek is the same as Poquessing Creek. Byberry Creek is a small tributary that flows into the Poquessing Creek. Poquessing is the bigger. It enters the Poquessing Creek right at City Line. You know where the bus terminal is, if you know the City Line at the end of Frankfurt Avenue. That's where Byberry Creek empties into Poquessing Creek. But it travels all around, goes through the golf course, all those golf courses on Grand Avenue. That's all Byberry Creek. But Poquessing is the bigger creek.
There is a chat question. Can you tell us where the miniature painting of Benjamin Rush?
Yes, it's didn't I put that in? I might not have put that in the image. It's the something Ford. It's a museum in New England. The name escapes me, and I always put I always attribute things in my presentation, but I think I omitted that one. I can find out and post it on Facebook if the person can check Facebook. The something Ford Foundation, not Ford Foundation, but a foundation that's an art gallery and art center in New England. And they have this miniature of Benjamin Rush. It's the only known image of him as a young man. And that image was first published in a book on Benjamin Rush, published by this author, Stephen Freed. That book came out maybe 10 years ago. And he found that image and published it in his book. And he came and spoke here when his book came out. And the name of that repository escapes me, and I apologize. Anybody else? Yeah, talking to the mic. Yeah.
What does mean Poquessing?
What does it mean?
Yeah.
Place of mice. What it means?
What, didn't Benjamin Rush have something to do with the Lewis and Clark?
Yes, he advised them on medicinal plants and treatments, and I guess it's somewhat related. It's a really fascinating thing because a lot of the treatments he recommended for the diseases and things that they might catch was mercury. And so he gave them mercury, and mercury, is one of these elements that doesn't disintegrate, or what's the word? So it's still radioactive, and the droppings of the explorers can now be determined by the radioactive mercury that they were taking and pooping out. So there's a scientific study where they're retracing the Lewis and Clark expedition by the mercury they were all dropping along the way. And that was Rush that advised them to take that. So yes, Rush advised Lewis and Clark on medicine and health for the trip. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I just would like to add something really quick in answer to the meaning of Poquessing. I'm just going to encourage everyone to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, because we're going to work with the Delaware tribe to do a series that explains a bunch of the place names in Northeast Philadelphia. And we'll give you a little more context on what place of mice, why did they call place of mice? Maybe they'll be able to tell us. And a bunch of the other Lenape words that are still in use in this area, kind of get a little bit more background for that. So follow us on social media to find out.
Yeah, there's there's very little physical trace of the Lenape around here now, but their heritage is preserved in the names they gave local creeks, Pennypack, Poquessing, Neshaminy, and also in the roads. So the paths that they created that became major roads in our area. Frankfurt Avenue, was originally the King's Highway, and then Bristol Pike, and then Frankfurt Avenue. That was a Lenape trail, and it basically followed the path of the river, the Delaware River, and it was right strategically at the point where the creeks that were it was crossing were no longer tidal, and so that you could cross the creek without an obstruction. So they strategically placed this road about a mile from the river. You could still get access to the river fairly easily, but far enough away that the creeks that you were passing weren't tidal. So it was like very strategically placed, and that road eventually, that Indian path eventually became Frankfurt Avenue. And Bustleton Avenue also was another Lenape path that became a major road. So those are some of the legacies of the Lenape in this area.
Will the African American Cemetery become part of Benjamin Rush State Park?
Yes, I mean, I'm not involved in those, but the word is that the Bureau of State Parks has officially approved absorbing the burial ground into the park. And that's going to happen. I don't know what the legal process
I can
is.
talk more
Oh,
about this.
why don't you take the,
Yeah.
Jennifer Robinson can.
Hi, I'm with the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia. And so we have an attorney that's working pro bono on helping transfer the land that was never recorded, that was thought to be sold to the city. It didn't have like an OPA number. It didn't have, there was no survey for it. There was no marking of where the land actually is. So we commissioned a survey. We're working on getting an OPA number, which the state needs. So it's in process. It's an incredibly long, complicated process. The state rejected like some forms of documentation we submitted, things like that. So it's in process. They have verbally said that they will adopt it, but everything is up in the air until it's done. So that's where it is.
Okay. Anybody else here in person? On Zoom?
No, a bunch of
Okay.
thank yous and congratulations and nice
Thanks.
presentation.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks. Please stay around for refreshments and networking, and please stay in touch with the project. Let me put that back.
Make some announcements on our
Okay.
upcoming meetings.
Go ahead.
Well, okay, our next meeting in June, the first Wednesday in June, will be at Trinity Oxford Church. We're going to get a talk from Jenny McCarthy there, who's a historian. Telling us about some of the historical people there. As a matter of fact, there will also be, before that, this coming Saturday, the Daughters of the American Revolution are giving a tour of the graveyard and discussing some of the French Indian War burials there, I believe, and on up to World War II. They're not wanting to take advantage of that. I think that's at 2:00 on this coming Saturday. And then we'll have the summer off, but we'll come back in September with a talk on the Urey House. For those who are somewhat familiar with that, it's a very interesting story. And then in October, and that's near Fox Chase, basically in Fox Chase, not in the town, but where the village, but outside Fox Chase. In October, Walt Saulberger, who gave a talk on Longhurst a few years ago, is going to give a talk on the history of Fox Chase. And as a matter of fact, Trinity Oxford would be kind of part of Fox Chase, a little bit south of there, but west of there. At any rate, Fox Chase will be on our mind for the next few months. So, and it's always on our mind, actually. Yeah,
You have something you want to say, Maureen?
yeah, go ahead. Maureen. Oh, okay, so that's
Okay,
it.
all right, thanks
All
all.
right, thanks for attending and see you in September, or see you in June.
Not here. Sure, don't come here in June.
That meeting will begin at 6:30, so we can enjoy the lightness of the June.
Make sure you are. And as one of my dear friends, periodically on Zoom said, half the fun of the NEPHN meetings are the attempts to get them running. So it's much easier to get done. So good night and hopefully see you.
Fun now.
This is
actually,
Nice to meet you.
president. 16 years.